Google seems to be taking a look at Tim Cook's cookbook, which may result in the Pixel 6 and Pixel 6 Pro, which is now official. These are not leaks anymore. We're talking about official announcements from Google on how to make a very vertically integrated smartphone experience, and it has me very interested. Let's begin. I don't talk about Android much anymore just because I feel like there's not a whole lot going on. It mainly just feels like camera hole here, camera hole here. Do you have 3 cameras? Do you have 4 cameras? Are 2 of them pointless? Latest Snapdragon chip. Some of them are 120 hertz, some of them are quad HD, some are both. Yada, yada, yada. Everything is just kind of blurring into themselves, but the reason I'm willing to break from my normally scheduled content and start talking about the Pixel again is because Google is actually making their own silicon now. They're taking a page out of Huawei and Apple's book and realizing those that are serious about software should develop their own hardware. And I'm actually very grateful that Google is doing this. They're calling it the Tensor chip, which is apparently going to allow for a lot of the algorithmic and machine learning Google has applied towards photography to also apply towards videography. I'm hoping this also results in better efficiency and great battery life. And genuinely, I think it's a great idea for any company that plans on having a long-term future with updating their hardware for many years to come, and I've always thought that was kind of a weaker point of Android, not just the resale value tanking, but also not getting software updates after 3 or 4 years and then you're done. Hopefully with the Tensor chip, Google can actually start breaking that norm and allow for 5 to 6 years of updates like iPhones get, and also I'm very curious to see what types of features or what types of performance we can get out of this chip now that Google is reaching away from Qualcomm, which honestly I thought was one of the biggest issues with the Pixel lineup always from the beginning. They always chose to launch them right before, like 2 or 3 months before the new Qualcomm Snapdragon chip came out. So basically for most of the Pixel's life, it had a year-old Snapdragon chip simply because they always tried to launch it in October for some reason. Samsung, I feel, was at least smart enough to always launch their new Galaxy phones right after the new Snapdragon chip came out. That way, for the majority of its lifespan, it had the latest generation Snapdragon chip. Google, for some reason, didn't feel like doing that, and I've always had issues with the Pixel phones since then, aside from the budget options. I enjoyed the 3A and the 4A. They were good deals, and I would recommend them to people, and I was like, okay, Google. Oops, I just set off everything, didn't I? But I really thought the Pixel team was mainly just going to be good at making budget phones, and they didn't want to really dabble in flagships. But I guess they want to go back to that flagship route and actually start shipping premium hardware again, which I honestly think they have a good shot at now, because for once, they're actually including 3 cameras in a phone, which is good because I always found it bizarre how Google at first was talking about how, telephoto's more important, we don't need ultra-wide. And then a year goes by and they're like, telephoto's more important, but we don't care. We want to have more fun. So we said goodbye to telephoto, and now we just have ultra-wide and regular. I don't know why it took Google so long for them to just make a phone that had both. Like, other phones have been doing this for years, and it sounds like the Pixel 6 Pro is finally catching up, because the Pro option at least has a 4x telephoto zoom and an ultra-wide lens plus a regular sensor, and this time they're using different sensors from the previous generation Pixels. So combined with Google's amazing computational photography and improved hardware, plus Google switching to their own silicon, and we're getting 120 hertz on a 6.7 inch display, so check that box. I really appreciate that. And also the design, I will give them credit for. I mean, it's not the most amazing groundbreaking design for the back of the phone, but I will give them credit at least that it feels original. You know, it felt like with the Pixel 5, and honestly a lot of different flagship phones these days, everyone was doing the basic box in the top left corner, and there wasn't much variety going around there. And I feel like the Pixel has kind of found an iconic look that kind of gives itself some individuality. I know that there's some phones out there that look kind of similar, but this little camera bump on the back that's somewhat flush with the Edge chassis should allow it to stop rocking so easily. So if you're laying this phone flat on a table, it'll just be kind of pivoted towards you a little bit. It won't rock back and forth, which I like. And the only issue I I could potentially see with it is it brings the ultra-wide lens closer to the center of the phone. In case you're curious, Apple pushes the ultra-wide lens to the farthest corner intentionally so that your hand does not show up in ultra-wide shots as easily. It's not a huge issue, and that's the only problem I might see come up with the Pixel 6 camera layout, but for the most part, the color options look decent, and the regular Pixel 6 has a 90 Hz display. I assume that one's going to be cheaper, but Google didn't say what the battery capacities are or what the prices on these are. They did do a centered logo on the back now because they have in-screen fingerprint readers, so taking another page out of Apple's book, I guess we can just put that logo in the middle, right? I guess no one will mind. Everyone freaks out when Apple does it, and when Google does it, everyone's like, well, you know, that makes sense. That's what the rest of the industry is doing. I'm glad they're finally adopting the in-screen fingerprint readers because those have been around for a long time in other Android phones, and Google was so hesitant to adopt them. They had Face ID basically for 1 year and then decided, scrap that idea. But knowing Google and how they like to announce big changes and then suddenly give up on them later, I'm very, very hopeful that this Tensor chip is actually something they give a lot of long-term support for, and they keep trying to make better with their hardware year after year. And all I'm worried about essentially is all the work Google put into like the Soli chip and how much they bragged about air gestures on the Pixel 4 and the face unlock technology, only for them to just see, oh, okay, these phones didn't sell very well, so the following year they just scrap them entirely and give up. Like, that's just going to annoy me if something similar to that happens again next year and they're just like, well, Pixel 6 didn't sell well, so we're just gonna give up on this whole Tensor thing and go back to using cheaper Qualcomm chips and maybe just stick to making budget phones. Like, I want Google to make flagships, okay? I've ridiculed Pixel in the past, I've mocked them for a lot of their stupid decisions, but honestly, I think Google, because they own Android, has the potential to make the best iPhone competition out there, because they don't have to deal with the Samsung problem of trying to load the Samsung apps and the Google apps onto one app, and you have combating calculator apps, combating calendar apps, and different app stores to choose from, whereas Google, if they can get their hardware right, it will result in having a phone that the software, the hardware, and even the silicon on the inside is being designed and optimized by one brand, which is honestly what I love about Apple products so much, is that they have a singular vision for their iPhones, and they do make annoying choices, don't get me wrong, and I'll complain about how long they stick with Lightning and keep that on there, but at least Apple is in complete control of so much of that hardware experience that it ends up being very pleasant for people, and that's why they keep buying them. But only Google really has the opportunity to do that same thing on the Android market, whereas Samsung, as long as they're not interested in building their own OS from the ground up, isn't going to be able to do that, and it's the same story with OnePlus as well. And even Huawei, to a certain extent, they have a lot more control over their OS, but still. I'm mainly just confused by Google's marketing strategy here, because they are announcing these phones now, but there was no keynote, there was no live stream or anything. It was basically just a tweet thread, and they met with YouTubers directly and let them check out the phones, but they couldn't film it, and I assume there's certain things they still aren't really allowed to talk about, but the phones aren't coming out until the fall later in the year, and that's when they're gonna reveal all of the tech specs and do more pricing. But they're still technically selling the Pixel 5 and 4a and that type of thing, so maybe Google is looking at the 6 and the 6 Pro as more flagship phones, so they don't really think it's gonna cannibalize their other options, but it's also just possible that those other options that they're still selling don't sell very well anyway, so they're not really worried about the Pixel 6 announcement preventing sales of the regular Pixels. They don't really care at this point. They're just like, we're working on it, let's just confirm the design, confirm the color options, we'll confirm some of the specs and let people know you should be excited, but YouTubers who get exclusive access on this thing, you can't take pictures of it and you can't show anything that we've showed you. Very bizarre strategy. I've never seen it work really with Samsung or Apple if they try to announce something like 3 or 4 months before it actually happens and just accelerate hype, but in my opinion, when the pricing and when the pre-orders go live and we can actually start buying these things, it'll probably just feel lackluster because Google has already confirmed it now at the beginning of August, and we're just gonna all know the majority of the specs and we're gonna know about the design and the cameras and whatnot, so it just kind of results in delayed hype. So when they start shipping it and they start giving more details, we're like, yeah, okay, we know most of this. I think it would have been way cooler if Google waited for an event in the fall and actually announced all of these things in a keynote and announced it alongside pricing with the new design, and they talked more about the Tensor chip and how this is going to allow them to have much better video video performance, and this is going to result in way better battery life. That would have been a great event, Google, but you found a way to screw it up, and I'm hoping that the Google Silicon team is a little bit smarter than the marketing team. Keep in mind, this is Google's first attempt at designing their own silicon, so I understand the excitement and all of us wanting them to do the same thing with the Pixel Watch and maybe Chromebooks, and soon Google will have an entire ecosystem of hardware of silicon that they designed, but the truth is, this is Google, and they've screwed up hardware in the past, and they're inexperienced in this division, so I would not be shocked at all if the Tensor chip is way slower than the Apple Silicon chip we're comfortable with in iPhones. I would love to be proven wrong, because I want Google to succeed here. They literally pay me to make these videos. It's not sponsored, but it's just how it works. And I just know a ton of things that Google has killed off over time, so I'm hoping that this is not one of those things that gets killed off in a couple years. Stay committed, Google. You're in this relationship now. You're getting married with your own silicon, and you're really committed to the Pixel 6, so let's see you stick to it. Let's see you get serious about it. Do you think the Pixel 6 poses a major threat to Samsung and OnePlus, or do you guys think those phones are fine? Honestly, I'm still quite annoyed that the Pixel 6 Pro has curved edges on the side. Like, how many times do we have to teach you this lesson, old man? We want the flat edge displays. The regular Pixel 6 has a flat edge, but for some reason the bezels look kind of ugly. I'm not sure why. Maybe the phone is just too tall, or the corners aren't curved enough, but it seems like it should be looking good, but for some reason it doesn't, and I'm kind of sick of the curved edge thing. I was hoping we could just give up on that. But anyway, feel free to let me know how you guys feel on the Pixel 6 and 6 Pro. This is your Apple Sheep here. I'll see you guys in the next one.